is a new moon according to the conjunction, and we're going to cover how to determine the day of the next conjunction easily. It's not as difficult as it's made out to be, even though the modern education systems and just the world at large tries to uneducate us regarding the ways of God. I think you'll see if you follow this paper and try it out, which does mean you have to get up before dawn, but if you do it a few times, I think you'll see it's fairly simple. So, how to determine the day of the next conjunction easily. Now, the modern Islamic, that were addressed in the news here, we're talking about all of the sons of Ishmael. He had 12 sons. It was pointed out that they were taken from an Egyptian handmaid, and so may, or probably do not hold the title or the same title that the Israelites hold, or the descendants of the man Israel hold. They will inherit the land between the Nile and the Euphrates, which is where virtually all of these 12 tribes of Ishmael presently reside. So an interesting point on this, though, of course, is the two sons of Joseph also were born. Joseph was given a daughter of the high priest in ancient Egypt. So both Ephraim and Manasseh also, their mother was an Egyptian. And yet Jacob, or Israel at the time, adopted them. So he put his hands on them, he gave them the blessing for Joseph, and adopted them so that they actually are part of Israel. And adoptions are valid. So when you adopt somebody, and there's a tendency for people to perhaps favor their true physical offspring, perhaps over an adopted individual, well, they shouldn't. They are part of the inheritance of that family once they're adopted. And you have this evidence from Israel's activities. But also the ancient Jewish community, that's meaning 100 BC to 100 AD, attempted to estimate the time when a first crescent moon could be seen. Or to conclude with this is that the modern rabbinic Judaism is the follow-up of part of this ancient Jewish community that purported and presented the oral law, was considered oral at the time of Christ. It became written. Today it's called the Gemara. It includes the Mishnah and the Babylonian Talmud, Shulchan Aruch, and all these other writings that are a curse on Judaism, or people who are aligned with modern Judaism. So it's, but at the time they were attempting to cause people to honor the first crescent moon. So we'll cover that a little bit here, and it's also covered in the paper, the start of the day. So they had actually at the time of Christ ancient lists of approved witnesses. Only certain people could be accepted as a witness of having seen this crescent moon. It proved difficult to predict the day in question, made publishing a lunar calendar impossible. So even with the modern equipment and available quick computations, regularly knowing when a first crescent moon can be seen is proved to be impossible. The effect of that is that the new moon as a holy day has been discarded, because then throughout the world, because they didn't know when it would be seen, and that means be seen in the vicinity of Jerusalem, only people in that vicinity would know when the crescent was. They couldn't let anybody else, with Judah spread around the world. There's no way they could let them know when to start their year, when they could start their month. If they don't know when they start the year, they're going to be incorrect with the Lord's Supper and the Passover. Incorrect with the day of Pentecost, which it's a good thing those individuals had the correct day, so they received the Spirit of God at Pentecost, or they might have not received it. I think they wouldn't have received it. So these days, knowing when they are, is very, very important. Now, the conjunction can't be seen. By obtaining the number of centimeters separating the sun and moon at sunrise, multiplying this number times 2, anyone can easily determine the time and day of the next conjunction. So it's not difficult or impossible as it's often presented, because we're not educated in these features anymore, which formerly everybody knew and understood. So the natural astronomical cycle governs the calendar we follow. All of humanity must worship the one true God, our Father, Eloah, named Yehovah, on the days that are set apart by the natural astronomical cycle. The 21-hour day, or one solar rotation, is from dark, or the end of evening nautical twilight, to dark in our local time. Now you can see that Genesis 1:5, God called the light day, the darkness he called night. Evening and morning were the first day. Psalm 104, verses 19 and 20, He appointed the moon for seasons. The sun knows it's going down. You made darkness. It is night, where all the beasts of the forest do creep forth. It's well known that the moon governs the annual calendar. It's aligned with the sun, so you have to know what both are doing at different times of the year to understand the seasons of God. The year starting in the spring, near the vernal equinox, not at it, but close to it. So the new moons occur at the conjunction of the sun, moon, and earth. These days are holy days. The first day of the first month establishes or sets the 3 annual feasts, with the attendant sanctified days as set apart for specific purpose or made holy, which is what sanctified and holy mean, set apart for specific purpose for our worship to our Creator. The year begins in the northern hemisphere spring. You can see that in Exodus 12:2. This month shall be to you the beginning of months. It shall be the first month of the year to you. Speak unto the congregation of Israel, saying, In the 10th day of this month they shall take to them every man a lamb, according to the house of their fathers, a lamb for a house. And if the household is too little for a lamb, let him and his neighbor next to his house take it according to the number of souls, every man according to his eating shall you count out from the sheep or from the goats. Shall keep it until the 14th day of the same month. The whole of the assembly of Israel shall kill it in the evening, and that's at 3 in the afternoon on the 14th day of preparation day for the Passover and for the days of unleavened bread. So this month is clearly identified here as the first day of the year. It's not meaning some other day or some other month. So it's this month in the spring that has the 15th day after the equinox set apart to be the Passover and the days of unleavened bread. The first day of the first month is established or set apart from the conjunction during Jerusalem's time zone. You can see that in Isaiah 2:3, which says, Many people shall go and say, Come, let us go up to the mountain of Jehovah, and the house of the God of Jacob. He will teach us of his ways. We will walk in his paths. For out of Zion, Mount Zion, as we're surrounded by Jerusalem today, shall go forth the law and the word of Jehovah from Jerusalem. So this law must be centered or have related to the time that this event is taking place in modern-day Jerusalem or Mount Zion. Now, the month that has the first month of the year is the one that has the 15th day following after the vernal equinox. The day is a Passover, categorized as a full moon. It's not always on a full moon. It can be at the end of the 14th day. It can be at the beginning of the 16th day. Most generally, though, the 15th day is the day of the full moon. Now, many people tell us that we need specialized mathematical abilities in order to be able to determine when the conjunctions will occur. Everyone who can multiply times 2 and divide by 24 can determine the day and hour of the next conjunction easily. So the conjunction. We're speaking below about the conjunction of the sun and moon and the earth in astronomy. Conjunction, or to be conjoined, means when there is a meeting of 2 or more heavenly bodies in the same longitude or right ascension. It is termed new moon when the moon is between the earth and sun, and is termed full moon when the earth is between the sun and moon. See a illustration there done by Norman that should help just with the understanding of what we're talking about here. Although the proportions of the illustration are incorrect, the image shows that the conjunction of the sun, moon, and earth look like they are on a geometric line with their centers pierced. They are all on the same longitude, and we are ignoring the latitude. At the time of the new moon, the centers of the sun and moon are sometimes in complete alignment. Often, though, they're slightly offset by a small portion of a degree because of the tilt of the earth, etc. At the time of the conjunction is a precise time everywhere on the planet according to our local time zone. Therefore, it will be in a 2-day period using local time. So I hope that's understood. You see that the timing of this event in the Middle East sets apart this day, but in our case, we're exactly 12 hours separated from Indonesia. 12 hours. So half the time we are in a different day than people living in Indonesia or somewhere close to it. So that's why individuals who attempt to keep these days according to their local time will be in error, and they have to keep it according to the time that the event of conjunction takes place. Who says so? Philo of Alexandria, from the Colson Harvard University Press, Loeb Classical Library. The Special Laws 2 and chapter 11, verse 41 states, the third feast is the new moon, which follows the conjunction of the moon with the sun. And in chapter 2, 26, verses 140, this is the new moon, or the beginning of the lunar month, namely the period between one conjunction and the next, the length of which has been accurately calculated in the astronomical schools. So yes, at the time of Christ, this is when Philo of Alexandria is writing. He was a scholar of sorts and a linguist. He spoke, I think it was about 5 or 6 languages fluently, and other ones as well. So his understanding at the time of Christ was these lengths of times at the conjunction have been accurately calculated in all the astronomical schools. Certainly Bar Samuel published a 70-year document with every one of the days of the conjunction calculated and listed. So it was well known, or well enough known. So it should be noted, though, that the popular Hendrickson's Publisher's Edition from 1993 of C.D. Young's 1854 translation does not have the same information that Colson translation gives. They've removed some of the information on this calculation of the conjunction and the timing. So just so you're aware of that. Now, Philo is a Jewish historian. Writing at the time of Christ, as we can see, the conjunctions were declared to be the determining factors in deciding the first day of the month, not the crescent moon. The crescent moon, with their approved witnesses, was coming from the Pharisees and those trying to perpetrate the oral law on Judah and on all the people there. So, Maimonides' book, Maimonides is also referred to or called a Ramban, as an acronym. The sanctification of the new moon. We've had this at several of the feasts in our discussions on the calendar. Book 3, Treatise 8, page 89, chapter 6, which was written about 1200 Common Era, states, the molad, I think we've all understood and have read and heard the term molad, is defined as the moment in the sun and moon in their uniform motion become conjoined in a certain part of the sky, which occurs everywhere in the same way, in contrast to the varying times which the new crescent first becomes visible in different areas of planet Earth he's talking about here. So you can see he clearly understood that what he's calling the molad is the conjunction in contrast to the new crescent. And when it becomes visible, unless it potentially could be visible, but the sky is overcast, so you wouldn't know. And this is why, instead of maintaining this as a holy day. It became awkward because they weren't sure when the day was going to be seen. And with the crescent, that meant that they weren't sure what day was the 15th for the Passover, or what day Pentecost was going to be on, or the beginning of the trumpets and tabernacles. This confounding of a very simple procedure of following the calendar with the conjunction is just absolutely confused, intentionally so that nobody really knows when the heck the Passover is. And if you don't keep it, you're out of the kingdom of God. If you miss Pentecost, you might not have received the Spirit of God after Christ's sacrifice. So these days are a big deal. And really, this is very simple. It is made complicated by just the absolute assaults on it partially by Rabbinic Judaism, a little bit by Trinitarianism, but for the most part, they don't even really care, because they're going to set up their own calendar and their own system of worship on the days that they assign, and keep God out of the picture. So the statement defines the conjunction. Judaism in general did not, and today do not, keep the new moon as a sabbatical holy day. They, and Islam as well, the Muslims as well, attempt to start the month by a crescent observation. You can see the paper, The Sin of Crescent Moon Observation. Now, the Muslims actually only have a 12-month year, which means every year they're a month short. And therefore their whole fasts and their whole cycles are continually rotating backwards through the year. So their former 7th month of the time of the fast, the Quran says to keep the covenant, I think 6 or 8 times. Says to keep the Sabbath 4 times. So I think Ahmed or Muhammad knew what he was talking about. It likely was a Christian, and has been totally confounded with the Hadithic interpretations that have done what Rabbinical Judaism has done with the Babylonian Talmud and Mishnah, and Shulchan Aruch and the other things. So this lunisolar conjunction can take place at any time during the Earth's 24-hour solar rotation, because the moon doesn't go around the Earth at exactly 24 hours. It's 24 hours, 50 minutes a day. So as Maimonides points out, though, it occurs in the same way at the same time everywhere on the planet, which would be different. Any month and every year will lose a bit of time, and therefore not be at exactly the same time of day. And you can see the effect of that. Everybody knows that who lives near the ocean, and because it governs the tides. So the time during this event takes place during Jerusalem's 24-hour time zone, sets apart the new moon day at the conjunction as a Sabbath. So Isaiah 8:5, when will the new moon be over, that we can sell grain, and the Sabbath, that we may open the wheat market, make the bushel smaller and the shekel bigger, to cheat with dishonest scales? So here we have the time of Amos. People are complaining, Israelites are complaining, that they want the new moon to be over so they can conduct business and sell, buy and sell. And they categorize it identically with the Sabbath as a holy day, because on the Sabbath, or new moon, they weren't allowed to open their markets. Today, it's deemed irrelevant. You can see that also in Isaiah 66:20. They shall bring all your brethren out from the nations as a grain offering to Jehovah, on horses, chariots, litters, mules, camels, to my holy mountain Jerusalem, says Jehovah. Just as the sons of Israel bring their grain offering in a clean vessel to the house of Jehovah, I will also take some of them for priests and Levites, says Jehovah. And just as the new heavens and the new earth which I make will endure before me, says Jehovah, so your offspring and your name will endure, and it shall be from new moon to new moon, and from Sabbath to Sabbath all mankind will come and bow down to me, says Jehovah. So as you can see, anciently, I think everybody agreed that anciently people kept the new moon as a Sabbath. They all agree they will at Christ's return and in the millennial kingdom and the new world to come. Everyone will keep it. It is just unnecessary for some bizarre reason to not have to keep it for this 40 Jubilee period. Worldwide kept it for a short period in the 40s. Actually, Mr. Hatchett, Don Hatchett, I believe his name was a living witness to the fact that they kept the new moon. as a holy day, but it was stopped because it was too much of a burden on the brethren, and things were too complicated these days, and so they just gave it up and stopped keeping it, but agreed that they would keep it in the millennial kingdom. Okay, Ezekiel 46, verses 1 to 3, thus says Jehovah Elohim, the gate of the inner court facing east shall be shut 6 working days. It shall be opened the Sabbath day, and opened on the day of the new moon. The prince shall enter by the way of the porch of the gate from the outside, stand by the post of the gate, when the priest shall provide his holocaust or burnt offering, and his peace offerings. He shall worship at the threshold of the gate, and go out, but the gate shall not be shut until evening. The people of the land shall also worship at the doorway of the gate before Yahweh on the Sabbaths, and when? On the day of the conjunction of the new moon. That's clear from Psalm 81, 3 and 4. Blow up the trumpet in the new moon, the shofar in the new moon, at the time appointed on our solemn feast day, for this was a statute for Israel and a law of the God of Jacob. And the Septuagint has that as a blow up the trumpet at the new moon in the glorious day of your feast. This is an ordinance for Israel and a statute for the God of Jacob. So I don't think anybody could be confused about any of that. You can be confused with other renderings and other translations where they try to make it a feast is indicating that, no, that's talking about Passover or the beginning of trumpets or some other feast day. No, the new moon is a glorious day of our feast. We just don't bother keeping it for the most part. Some of us do. So conclude with Colossians 2, 15 and 16. When he had disarmed the rulers and authorities, he made a public display of them, public spectacle of them, having triumphed over them through him. Therefore, that's an important word. Let no one act as your judge in regard to food or drink, because it was contested that you could, they would be offering meat offered to idols and were refusing to eat it. They were being offered unclean food or meat that had been found dead, which are not allowed to eat. But they ate clean foods in any event. But they were also being offered unclean foods. The Mithraic mysteries had holy water instead of wine. And so these New Testament, New Covenant Israelites from the Gentiles, they tried to have them not be allowed to drink alcohol and to eat really anything that's put in front of them, or you might offend your host, in respect to a festival or a new moon or a Sabbath day. So those are fairly clear, I think. So the study is important so that everyone can learn to easily determine any upcoming new moon holy day if the published times are not available. The precision with which this event could be predicted allowed all seafaring communities and naval forces to gauge their coming and going. This is important to them because the moon's cycles govern the ocean's tide. So if you don't want to be sitting 300 or 400 yards out on a flat as the oceans are coming and going in your boats, maybe you govern your movements according to the cycles if you're coming and going on the ocean. So throughout the day, the conjunction is on the day that begins the new astronomical month. That's everywhere. Every army, every navy governs all of their legislation and their activities by the conjunction, and governed by the start and the finish with the end of evening nautical twilight. So the fact is, we're coming out of a Trinitarian-induced dark age. The proponents of Trinitarian Christianity have intentionally removed most of the knowledge people had from ancient times. There was a huge amount of ocean travel and trade and everything going on after the floods in New Brunswick and in eastern Canada. The Mi'kmaq Indians spoke and wrote ancient Egyptian. So you could conclude they were left here by the traders and things like that. But they in the middle 1600s on the east coast of North America, a priest from Rome was there and claimed that he was teaching them how to use this language, because no native people were understood to have a written language. Well, it's not true. They lost it. But this priest, a Jesuit actually, was writing out what he was saying, because the Micmac Indians were explaining to him, speaking to him, and gave him the written letters of the language that they had retained up until the early 1600s. He hand wrote it out and tried to claim what he was teaching them, a language that they could understand. Well, of course, when ancient Egyptian texts started getting translated, 350, 400 years later, they found that every one of the symbols that he was giving them and using them for writing down their communications was ancient Egyptian. So there was a huge amount of trade, and it was just lost over time. But this is the type of thing that's been removed from understanding people from all over the world and their extensive trades. So the book, The Maps of the Ancient Sea Kings in 1966 by Charles Hapgood, is a useful reference. It shows and explains many of the ancient maps and records that were on at the library at Alexandria. It explains the detailed, extensive geographic knowledge and navigational understanding that the ancient peoples possessed. They knew what they were doing. All naval and fishing people everywhere on the earth have understood this lunar solar timing and the tide's relationship with the moon's journey. It is only recently that people have generally abandoned this knowledge that was also necessary anciently for travel. But we get taken everywhere and don't have to worry about it. Hopefully the captain knows what he's doing, and that's enough for us. But this lunar cycle, the moon's apparent daily travel around the earth, takes 24 hours and 50 minutes a day. Causes the oceans to rise and fall at fairly regular intervals. On the average, the period between two successive high tides is 12 hours and 25 minutes, or one half the time it takes the moon to circuit the earth. The ocean's tides are caused primarily by the moon's gravitational pull. So as the moon is traveling over any part of the world, that is what affects the tides and can cause them to be larger or smaller. At the conjunction, the moon is lined up with the sun from outside our point of view on Earth. So we can see the dark side of the moon, or actually we don't see the moon at all, because of the extreme brightness of the sun outshines the extremely dimly lit moon. So a new moon occurs when the apparent longitudes of the Earth and moon and sun differ by 0. The moon moves eastward away from the sun in the sky. We see a bit more of the sunlit side each night. So a few days after a new moon, we can see a thin crescent in the western evening sky. At this point, for the next few nights, we can see the dark side of the moon faintly illuminated by the sunlight reflected off the earth. The first quarter moon is the crescent moon growing to wax or grow fatter. When half the moon's disk is illuminated, we say the moon has reached its first quarter phase, because you're heading to a quarter of a round. A round moon. The term comes from the fact that the moon is a quarter of the way through lunation. At first quarter, the moon is 90 degrees east of the sun along the ecliptic, so we're looking at the sunlit side of the moon from off to the side. It can have a slightly different effect in different parts of the world. I guess we all understand that. At this time, 50% of the moon's visible surface is illuminated at a quarter moon. Because it is 90 degrees from the sun, the first quarter moon sets approximately halfway through the night. The waxing gibbous moon continues to wax, meaning grow fatter. There's no longer a crescent. During this period, after the first quarter, we say we have a gibbous moon. The full moon is opposite the sun in the sky, and we see all of the moon's sunlit side of it. The full moon is 180 degrees around the ecliptic from the sun in the sky. So it's in a line 180 degrees straight across from the sun. At this time, the moon's visible surface is illuminated. It rises almost exactly as the sun is setting at the time of the full moon. So the second half of the moon's journey is the inverse of the first. The moon is waning or growing slimmer, and it's once more described as gibbous. The waning gibbous moon is the second half of the moon's journey. inverse of the first. Each evening it rises later and later after sunset. The third quarter moon is 3/4 of the way around its journey, and the moon once again shows us one side of its disk illuminated and the other side in darkness. However, the illuminated side we now see is the one that was in darkness at the first quarter phase. The last quarter occurs when the apparent longitudes of the moon and sun differ by 270 degrees. So you're 3/4 of the way along, which is why you're calling it third quarter. At this time, 50% of the moon's surface is illuminated. The moon rises around midnight, and this rising and setting will help you if you want to spend a bit of time following what's being discussed here. Once you've watched it happen and see it, and you have it in your head, like a picture, you'll understand it very clearly. You just have to do it a few times, and this will all make much more sense. So the moon rises around midnight, crosses the local meridian around sunrise. It approaches the new moon. The phase of the moon is a waning crescent until we can't see it at all. It then becomes a new moon and repeats the cycle. We won't see the last crescent, the last sliver of the moon, much after the age of 28 days. We seldom see the new crescent moon until it has an age of more than 24 hours. So when you're talking about a crescent moon and calling it a day of importance in the calendar, you're waiting at least 1 or 2 days after the conjunction. So if you're going to try to see, by multiplying times 2 and dividing by 24, how to find when the next conjunction is, you'll have to calibrate the tape measure. Jacques produces for one that just it has some explanations on the actual tape instead of just going, but you can just go and spend $5 and buy yourself a tape, a 1 meter tape. So we hold a tape measure at arm's length, typically in front of our face. The distance between our eyes and the rulers at arm's length is about 60 centimeters for the average adult. In order to calibrate the tape measure for our body size, we need to stand facing a wall, measure 60 centimeters from between your eyes and the wall. If we have long or short arms, we will need to adjust this, as the measure is important for gauging the degrees and therefore the time at a distance, the sun and moon's distance in our case of what we're trying to do here. So if you try your measurements from your chest or from your chin or from other places, you really need to put it right on your forehead. Have somebody watch that you're actually standing up straight to gauge the 60 centimeters, because that's important for gauging planets that are a long ways away. But it's still very accurate. Okay, at that distance, a 1 centimeter division on a ruler presents an angle of 1/60th radian, and 1 degree is equivalent to 157.295 radian. The angle is subtended by a 1 centimeter object at arm's length. So whether you're using your fingers or a tape measure, a small wooden ruler, it won't matter. It's because this 1 centimeter object at arm's length that's close to the 60 centimeter distance is a quite reasonable approximation to 1 astronomical degree. For example, the apparent diameter of the full moon would be about half a centimeter when viewed with a ruler held at arm's length. You can see a picture of what we're talking about here. If you hold the tape measure flat against a wall with 2 hands at the 60 centimeter distance, adjust your hands, arms, shoulders, hips, and neck so that we can touch the wall flat with the tape, but our eyes remain at the original 60 centimeter distance. Remember this position for accuracy, so just test it out yourself, have somebody measure you up, and then once you have an idea of how to hold it, it'll stick with you and you'll be able to do it any place at any time. So remembering this position for accuracy when performing the measurement between the rising sun, so the sun, you have to get up before sunrise and stand there and wait, and the growing slimmer or waning crescent moon, so that you have both of them in sight and can make a measurement between these two objects. Now, the angles can be estimated to a reasonable approximation by holding a ruler at arm's length or by using your hand itself. A clenched fist, excluding the thumb, spans about 10 degrees. This is 10 astronomical degrees, with a fully spread hand spans about 20 astronomical degrees, or close. So if you're a giant and you have huge hands, you'll have to make some modifications. If you're a child doing this, you most certainly can do it, but you'll have to have an adjustment with a tape so you can see that your smaller or larger hands, how they fit. But for your average hands, this works fine. For smaller angles, we can use other guidelines. For example, at arm's length, the width of our smallest finger is roughly 1 degree. So you use your pinky, you're very close to 1 astronomical degree. A thumb's width facing us is about 2 degrees, and on its side is 1 degree, with the distance from the tip of our thumb to its first joint is about 3 degrees. Although everyone's hands, of course, are different, it's easy enough to take our measurements and calibrate our natural guides to help us estimate angles in the sky, because this is what we're talking about with angles. And this information was adapted from an article in British Astronomy magazine written by Ian Nicholson. Very good article. The pictures below will help us understand the concepts being discussed. Remember, what we're trying to say here, and hopefully it can be understood, is 1 centimeter is equal to 1 degree of astronomical movement, because the universe isn't exactly moving. It's the planet Earth that's moving, spinning around. But the astronomical movement of the moon takes close to 2 hours. So you have some pictures here by Norman of what we're speaking about with your hand sizes. In the northern hemisphere, the North Star Polaris is always in line with 2 stars outside of the Dipper. And this is true north and can be readily seen in the picture below, and with a bit of practice can be easily located. So you always know, at least in the northern hemisphere, where you are, and hopefully that tells you where you're going or wanting to go. For our review, if the angle is shown in degrees between the sun at sunrise and the moon in any day of its last quarter are used instead of Polaris and Marek, the concept can be understood. So here we're just using an example for finding true north, because that's what the Dipper is. It's true. I'm not using a compass, but hopefully you can understand the point that we're making here. So try this at sunrise for even a few times, and most of the fundamental points being discussed in this paper will become plain. So how the heck do you determine the day of the next conjunction? For our purposes, we will use a 1 meter, 100 centimeter tape measure, as using it is inexpensive, easy to carry, does not require much practice, just good weather and good vision. When the sun is rising, take a measurement in centimeters between the center of the sun and the center of the waning crescent moon. So this is usually in the last quarter, third quarter, and has 7.5 days of time remaining. So if you have bad weather one or other day, you can still have lots of time to determine the conjunction. So take your measurements, record the day, correct local time to the minute, and the number of centimeters showing. You can see a picture there of what we're talking about. The moon moves close to 0.5 centimeter per hour, so we can multiply the number of centimeters by 2. This measure, so if you take your tape measure and you put it in the middle of the rising sun, in the middle of the setting moon, and multiply times 2. So it'll give you the approximate number of hours, which we must convert into number of days until the next conjunction. So this measurement in any time frame, well, you could do it from the full moon if you want, but my arms aren't, well, I guess they're long enough, but it's not that easy. So it's easier to do when the sun and the moon get closer. And as long as you have 3 or 4 days notice, you'll know when the next holy day is coming. It's not a disaster to miss a day or two, as long as you understand what you're doing and can follow this. So we do this by dividing the number of centimeters by 24 hours to provide the whole days. So you have your number of hours, you divide it, having multiplied the 0.5 centimeters by 2, you'll have your total numbers, you divide that number by 24 hours, and that will give you whole days. Add the remaining hours and you will know which local day and approximate local time the next lunar new moon occurs. So you have the number of days, the number of extra hours left over, and you'll know, and remarkably closely, when the next new moon will occur, or next conjunction will occur. This measurement can be done any time after the full moon, but in the third quarter with 7.4 days remaining is the easiest. 7.4 days, so we're talking about the last quarter here, equates to 177 hours and 36 minutes. 7 full days are 168 hours, and 0.4 of 24 hours is 9 hours and 36 minutes. This measure will give us the number of hours we must convert into the number of days or the part thereof until the next conjunction, talking in local time here now. That's what you'll have to do this in, local time, wherever you are on planet Earth. If this puts the conjunction close to dark in Jerusalem, then you do the calculation below, that is, divide by 0.51 degrees to get a more precise result. So for most days, simply multiplying by 2 is adequate. It's only when you're getting close to the end of a day that you have to be a bit more precise and more cautious. The moon moves relative to the sun by an amount almost equal to the moon's diameter every hour, which equals the 0.51 degrees or 0.5 centimeters per hour. That's the movement we're talking about here. This equates closely to a movement of 12.2 degrees every 24-hour day for the monthly journey. Using a tape measure in centimeters provides a very accurate estimation. Even using your fingers will provide us with a remarkably close approximation as well. Dividing by the 0.51 degree rate of change per hour gives you a more precise result, which you're really only needing if the end of the day is going to be close, and if you're, in our case, we're 7 hours ahead of or outside of the Jerusalem time zone. So that's what you have to monitor this. If you're in China or elsewhere, you have to make your hour changes different. Hopefully everybody understands that in any event. If multiplying by 2 puts the time of the conjunction near the end of the day, which is close to dark or the end of evening nautical twilight, do the calculations to get the necessary, more precise result. The rate of change per hour will equal the future time of conjunction in hours from the time we took our measurements. So we must adjust this local time of conjunction to Jerusalem time and adjust the day if required. Now the reason is everybody then will be keeping a different time zone and different holy days, but everybody is keeping the Sabbath on the seventh day whenever it comes to them. But they don't move the Sabbath. The fact that the Sabbath is ending at a certain time in Jerusalem doesn't mean you don't keep it as the Sabbath catches up with you. The point being made here, though, is that the timing of the conjunction in Jerusalem sets that day. So it's that day of the week, it's the first day of the month, and how it fits in the year. It's setting the day apart. It's done so that all the assemblies of Elohah, the churches of God, the covenant-keeping house churches presently, and eventually all of humanity will be observing a uniform day of worship on our round planet. Hopefully that's clear. The reason to use Jerusalem's time zone is because we were commanded that the law goes forth from Mount Zion, and that sets this day apart. And uniformly then, everybody on the planet keeps that day when it arrives for them. That's what makes the first day of every month. It sets up the day of the Passover, establishes the day of Pentecost, sets the trumpets. Then you have to fast on atonement, keep the days of tabernacles. This is important to know and understand this, and it shouldn't be too complicated. It's a bit mind-boggling when the first time you hear this, but as soon as you practice it a bit and try to do it, it'll very clearly become easy for you to do. You have to get up before dawn and start working it a bit. So this picture above is of the crescent moon on April 14, 2004 at 6:46 local time in southern Ontario, Canada. Sunrise was at 6:40, daylight savings, which had commenced on April 4th at 2 a.m. added. So this was day 24 of the cycle, with a waning crescent moon in the third quarter phase. And I think you can see from the picture there, you can see the hint of the round moon and the sliver that's being of the sunlight reflecting off it. The moon was full on April 5th at 6:03 local time, a.m. local time. After dark on the evening of April 14th was the 15th day of the first month. This was the night to be much remembered, and the night of the actual Passover meal. The time for the last quarter moon was on April 11th at 10:46 evening, and the moon was to be new at 8:21 local time on April 19th, 2004. So this event took place at 13:21 English time, if that can be tolerated, or Zulu. And the Greenwich Mean Time has a number of different names attached to it, but that's what we're speaking about here, which was at 15:21 or 3:21 in Jerusalem's time zone. This is 7 hours different from the time of day in local time from southern Ontario or eastern North America, but in exactly the same day of the week. So I was using the information and the calculations was from the U.S. Navy military data that has very helpful information. Should be on everybody's saved lists on their browser because it's very nice to check on things. There's numerous other programs as well, inexpensive that can, or some of them are free, that'll also give you very close times as well. By very close, I'm meaning within numbers of minutes or numbers of seconds and minutes. So the measure on the tape was gauged to be 62 centimeters. 62 times 2 will indicate 124 hours. 124 hours divided by the 24 hours in a day is 120 hours for 5 complete days with 4 hours remaining. Adding the 4 hours to 0646 gives us an estimated time at 10:46 on April 19th for the projected local time of the conjunction. This is 2 hours 25 minutes later than the published time, but well within the correct day. So you can see simply, multiplying by 2 and dividing by 24 was a couple hours out, but well within the correct day, so there's no reason to do the mathematics, dividing by 0.51 if you want or need to be more precise, because you're in the middle of the day here, so it's not like you can be in conflict with or have the wrong day. If we needed the more precise time, divide 62 by 0.51. That gives us 121.6 hours. This means we add an hour and 36 minutes to the 6:46 and get 8:22, 1 minute late compared to the published times for the upcoming conjunction. So stretching out our tape measure here, adding up your centimeters, multiplying by 2 and dividing 24 gives you an accurate reflection. Dividing the 62 by 0.51, a minute late. That's how close it is by holding up a tape measure. Now, you have to be close to the center of the sun and the moon. You actually have to do it correctly. You can't just sort of be spinning tape measures around and say I'm close and hoping for the best. So you actually have to do this correctly. But I think everyone can see it's not too difficult. The picture taken here of the exact time I was doing this, whenever it was 2004, should explain it reasonably well enough, and you can all try it wherever you are on planet Earth. The sun and crescent moon images are exaggerated to be more readily seen. The greater the angular distance between the moon and the sun, the more of the moon's illuminated side we see. A very slender crescent moon would indicate that only a few days remain until a new moon. If you do this for a while, you can in the third quarter just look up and see, 7 days coming, 5 days, 3 days, and then as the crescent goes down to close to disappearing, which it does a day before the conjunction, you can estimate it just by looking at it. But trouble is, you need to get up before dawn to practice it a bit. Some people do, they're farmers and they have to, and they're up and about working around anyway. Others of us will have to actually do a bit of effort to try to do this, but I think once you watch it, just watch from the third quarter of the moon, go out every morning, see the size of the crescent as it starts getting slimmer and slimmer, closer to when the moon is, you'll get a very good picture of it. The last 3-4 days, do some measurements, a few calculations, and you'll see how simple this really is. Almost everything we're trying to produce and publish and present to the world at large is very, very simple. The plan of God is simple. Everything about all of this is simple. So, the background. Angular measure. So I put this background in just so people understand really what we're talking about. We all understand it, but I want to cover it anyway. Angular measure means any measure of the separation between two objects as seen from a specific point. So, two objects, sun and the moon, from planet Earth. It's expressed in angular units, minutes of arc, degrees or seconds of arc. Angular measurements are used by the astronomical observers to describe the positions of celestial objects in the sky. For our purposes, the objects are the sun and the moon, their angular separation viewed from Earth during the moon's last quarter. It's measured in degrees of separation. When the angular distance is less than 90 degrees separation, we will see less than half the moon's illuminated side. This will look like a curved sliver of light and has caused the waning crescent phase. The number of these degrees between the rising sun and waning moon equate to a length of time in hours until the upcoming conjunction. For the rough estimates that are to be used for estimating the time remaining until the next conjunction, the widely accepted rules are very simple. So they also are amazingly accurate in estimating the day of the next conjunction. As more time is spent observing the moon's movement, as the ancients did, they weren't playing games or watching TV or doing other things that we seem to find ourselves habitually drawn to. They were out watching the movement of the stars and the movement of the moon. And today you have that farmers will plant certain crops at certain parts of the lunar cycle and wait. They'll actually wait, because in their part of planet Earth, the planting of these types of grains and seeds will do better if planted at certain times of the lunar cycle, which would seem odd, but everything that's going on in life, and the astronomy is good. Use it as astrology for predicting the future, but astronomy has an effect on what's going on here on planet Earth, which might seem odd. Okay, we would then be able to more accurately know at which points in its cycles the moon moves faster or slower than the average of 29.53 days a month. We would use these modified figures to come up with a very accurate conjunction time, as the ancients were able to achieve. Using simple mathematics, meaning dividing by 0.51, will only be required when the time of the conjunction is close to dark at the end of evening nautical twilight, EENT. The rest of the time we need to simply multiply the angular separation, the measurements on your tape measure, by 2. Ancient Aristarchus was also determined the angle between the quarter phase sun and moon. Now, Aristarchus of Samos, about 310 BCE, in his book on the sizes and distances of the sun and the moon, tried to determine the relative distance between the Earth and the sun by noting the simple geometry between that the Earth, moon, and sun formed a right triangle with the 90 degrees angles vertex, meaning the peak, the top, at the position of the moon when the moon was at quarter phase, one half of its disk illuminated by the sun. This means that if you could measure the moon-Earth-sun angle, you could work out what relative length of the hypotenuse of this triangle was between the Earth and the sun in terms of the length of the Earth-Moon distance. The problem is that this angle is very close to 90 degrees, and in fact is about 89 degrees. Even a 1 degree error on such a skinny triangle creates a sizable error. So how did Aristarchus measure this 2,300 years ago? He attempted to measure the time interval between the first and third quarter moons, computed their difference, which by the geometry of the situation would give you twice the angle of the Earth-Sun-Moon. The problem is that though there works in this principle, the moon's orbit is not circle. It doesn't go around in a nice round circle like a basketball going around the Earth. And the moon does not travel at a constant speed. These factors caused Aristotle to get a distance of 8 to 20 times the Earth-Moon distance as the distance to the Sun rather than the 93 million. You don't need to understand all that, but it just shows you anciently they're using the very similar thing of angular measure and time that these bodies are moving in relationship to each other. He was doing it 2,300 years ago. They're very close on some things. It was used recently, 200 years ago, to measure the height of Mount Everest, and it was only, I think, 23 or 4 meters incorrect. This is 150 years before anybody was climbing Everest. It was then, 23, 24 meters of the exact distance by this measurement using angular measure. Okay, estimating angles by eye. As we saw above from the work of Aristarchus of Samos, angular measure was used anciently, understood by, used by all. Today it's used by astronomers as well as navigators. If Aristarchus had more precise measuring tools, he could have had a closer projection, but this example shows that the concept was understood. Everyone here is at least familiar with sundials. The most accurate of all earlier sundials is the star dial. It's also called the nocturnal dial. These were used as early as the 15th century, as the 1400s, who told time by the position of the stars, as well as by the movement of the sun and the moon. The nocturnal dial works so well in the northern hemisphere because it's based on the North Star called Polaris. Polaris is almost directly on the axis of the Earth's tilt and always appears in the same position in the sky. The Big Dipper rotates in a complete circle around the North Star Polaris. So whenever we look at the North Star, the Dipper, in whatever position it holds in the sky will correctly point out Polaris. This is done by using the two outer stars of the cup of the Dipper, Merak and Dubna, aligning them with the North Star. And it's not much assistance for people in the southern hemisphere, but I'm using this just to make the point. And the alignment shown in the tool below is to be understood in our local time zone. So you can see how the wheel was held up and the angular measure was given, and showing the North Star and how this degrees were done. So the one way to chart the moon's behavior is to chart its position with respect to the sun and the earth. Specifically, we can measure the angle between the moon, sun, and earth as the vertex of the angle. So at a time when both the moon and the sun are visible, we can measure the angle between the moon and the sun from our observing location. Each time we measure and record the angle, we should also observe and record the shape or phase of the moon and notice whether the lit or unlit portion of the moon is nearest the sun. And the ages during the phases of the lunar cycle show a complete cycle takes approximately 29.53 days. So maybe in the new heavens and the new earth, we'll have a nice 30-day cycle of the moon, and it all takes place, and everything moves around cyclically and no problems. But maybe all of this is because the earth and everything on it is out of balance from the curse and everything we've done by refusing to keep the terms of the covenant. Who knows? Or maybe we'll just have to do it this way for a while. And either way, you don't need to worry about it. The first quarter will correspond to an age of about 7.4 days, full moon to about 14.8 days, third quarter to 21.1 days, leaving about 7.4 until the days of the conjunction. 7.4 is 7 days, 0.4 times 24 equals 9.6 hours, 0.6 equals 6 times 36 minutes. Now, this would indicate that from the third quarter, there will be 7 days, 9 hours, and 36 minutes until the next conjunction. So just having that in your head, you got the last quarter, which you can usually see and verify quite clearly when you're on a nice dark night, no clouds, and you go out and you see it. You know very clearly you're 7 days, 9 hours, and 36 minutes away until the next conjunction. And then as you just see as the sliver gets smaller and smaller by each day, you can estimate within a day or two just visually. So I won't cover all the definitions here. I just wanted to make it clear because some of this angular measure, people wouldn't be used to hearing something like that. But you're still talking your latitude is your angular distance of a place north or south of the equator. Your longitude is the angular distance of a place east or west of Greenwich, or Zulu. Lunation is another term for a lunar month, or the monthly cycle. So you can just review those. So we'll close here with a practical application of what's being discussed here for this past little while. Here's one of Norman's illustrations. When the sun is rising, use a 100 centimeter tape measure to take a measurement in centimeters between the center of the sun at sunrise and the center of a waning or getting skinnier crescent moon, which will be to the southeast in the northern hemisphere. We need to record the day and correct local time to the minute and the number of centimeters showing on the tape. So you can just do the marker with when you're holding the tape up and set your thumbs there and just on the outside of it and have somebody write it down for you. Or just put it down, do it yourself, hold it back up for verification a few times. Multiply the number of centimeters times 2 to get the approximate number of hours until the next conjunction in a local time zone. This angular measure will give us the approximate number of hours that we must convert into number of days until the next conjunction. Divide the number of hours by 24 to get the whole number of whole days remaining. Add the remaining hours and we will know which local day and approximate local time the next lunar new moon occurs. Convert this local time to Jerusalem's time zone, and we will know which day is the upcoming holy day of the sabbatical new moon. I'd like to acknowledge Norman Gray for the illustrations, which I think I drove him crazy trying to do and change, maybe a few hundred times, which were used for conceptual purposes. They're not intended to be an accurate reflection, but to make the point being discussed here, and to Kirk Woodside for the insight. You may remember all these discussions going back to 2002 and 3 and 4, putting this together so it could be understandable. So hopefully we are understandable, and we can make the point here that you can multiply by 2 and divide by 24 and actually know when the next conjunction is. You don't have to be a NASA scientist to do it. And so we're hopefully this is verifiable, and everybody that's challenged this and argued about it and got quite distressed about reading this and covering it did eventually get back and say, how can that possibly be that close? Well, it can possibly be that close because the cycles are reasonably well established and stable, and it's only us that are unstable. And so when you hear something new that you haven't heard before, you don't need to start a fight. As we sometimes get people coming on services and they're going to just unload on us. And we don't necessarily have to put up with that. But just expect that. Because it's regrettable that in our schooling and this, we're sort of not, didn't learn to listen and how important listening is, and just think about what you're told. Chew it over for a month or chew it over for a year. The point is to understand the plan of your Creator God, to understand what He's doing with His fallen host and His fallen planet, how He intends to reconcile it, and if He tells us to appear before Him on a certain day, we should be able to discern what day it is and not be confounded by 90% of planet Earth who doesn't want you to do it correctly. So thank you for all of that, and we'll close.